problem.
I think what might be implied, other than complete ignorance, is that there are no problems that can be solved. There are no problems that are not inherent to this type of entertainment and this industry.
That is the that is the other thing. And while I'm certainly not offering solutions, I think honestly, like when it comes to things in the game industry, like it needs to get to a point where like people are ready to start talking about things before they can even talk about like how do we solve them. I mean, it's so backwards and it's so weird. Yeah. So not to cast a sour note before we get started.
The sour note is the rage here. I mean, so much so that it doesn't really matter to us. We really have given up, I mean, we wish the people that we appreciate all the luck in the world, and they're going to need it. But and some people get lucky, etc. But that it doesn't mean anything. It never goes anywhere because it can't. Because of how that whole thing works. I don't think there's really any hope for that to become much better. And part of this is, I believe, inherent to the form of games as such. You build an industry around something that is extremely competitive and all about winning and all that, and especially catering to like young males who have a need to constantly prove themselves. Well, basically, you're asking for trouble. I mean, this, and as long as you do that, which I don't think they can stop without sort of stopping the whole industry, then your problems can't really be solved unless we can massively like organize the parents of all children in the world to educate their kids better.
That's never going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm ready to get started if you are.
I've started already.
I know you have. Well, so I have your permission to record, right?
Oh yeah, I thought you were.
Okay. Yeah. No, I have been.
No, fine.
So all we need to get started is, can you give me your full name, your age, where in the world you are based out of, and for people who are not familiar, can you talk a little bit about your experience in games?
Okay. My name, Michaël Samyn. Michaël is the Dutch for Michael. What was it again? My age?
Yes.
2015. I'm 47. 47. Yeah. What gender?
You can say your gender. That's right. This is the 90s. You need to be very PC. Where you're located and a little bit about your experience in the game space.
And I grew up in Belgium, so I never moved out of this country. I do hope so one day to do that. And then the whole thing about games, right? Well, the thing is, I was trained a graphic designer, and for print. So I graduated in 1990. Even studied without computers. It was all like scissors and tape and things like that. And I learned how to use a computer for graphic design during a civil service, because the army service was still obligatory. I was sort of in the last year where they did that. But you could choose to do a civil service that was twice as long, but slightly more interesting. And then it happened rather quickly. So at some point I taught graphic design and was never paid until like after a whole year, and suddenly I had a lot of money that I spent on a computer. Started using that quite quickly for interactive things, and then in the middle of the 90s the web certainly emerged, and I jumped on it and basically dropped everything else, both the graphic design I was doing for print as the art I had been starting to create, in favor of doing things only on websites. That's how I met my partner, Uriah Harvey, that I'm still living and working with, on a website called hell.com. which was sort of like a semi-secret arts collective, where all sorts of net artists collaborated with each other. And so Uriah and I started working with each other on a rather romantic piece. And one thing led to another, and we decided to do that more seriously, and she moved to Belgium. And so first we continued making websites, both as designers for clients and as artworks. And then, like in the early 2000s, like 2002 or something, when social media started, we started feeling very uncomfortable on the web as artists. It felt like it was becoming a very different place. And we had
how do you mean?
Excuse me?
How do you mean uncomfortable and different? Like what was changing?
It felt like on the one hand, corporations were taking over, like sort of anonymous things that offered other ways to use the internet than just using the internet, sort of layers on top of it, also in terms of technology, a lot of things were shifting towards servers. I guess that's part of the sort of more corporate aspect. We were very fond of doing things client side, and you do like it's all local, your source is always visible, all these things sort of very accessible, very open and easy to share, and then everything got pushed more and more towards the server, where now it's that sort of completed now with the cloud, where everybody's stuff is in the cloud. You don't own anything anymore now. It's all somebody else's. So that started then, and also it's sort of like because of this sort of layer that they put on top of the internet, it felt like people were not paying attention so much anymore. Like the idea of surfing was getting lost. In the beginning surfing was this word that we used to hop from one link to another, and the internet felt like a space that you could explore, and that was disappearing. And that exploration was really cool for artists, because you discover a lot of things, and it was very blurry, the distinctions between what was art and what wasn't, and that was a very interesting thing for us. So we started looking for another medium to really continue what we were doing, and we had already done some things in real-time 3D on the web, and had played video games a bit, without being fanatical or anything, but we had used elements of video games in some of our web works. And then we thought, let's try this. How hard can it be? It turned out to be relatively hard, but yeah, we started just playing with that, and the transition phase was a postgraduate period at the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht that we were offered. We sort of spent 2 years just playing games, researching games, going to conferences, and making sort of a first design and some prototypes of a game that we ultimately never made, but that was a very good exercise. And then just really continued working. The first game was given away for free. It was The Endless Forest. It was commissioned by a museum originally, and hosted, because it was a multiplayer game, The Endless Forest, and hosted on their server for a long time. But bit by bit, sort of, as I can see now in retrospect, we moved sort of more and more towards the game industry. I guess also as it developed as an industry for smaller independent companies, which we didn't think of. I mean, we were just artists. We were a mini art collective, the two of us, and we started a company, but only really to sort of have sort of a vessel to dump the art funding in that we started requesting, because that was easier. And then bit by bit, I guess that became more serious in a way, but never really. We never found ourselves to be entrepreneurs or something. We wouldn't know how to do that. But that's it. One game after the other. We published 8 games before we called it quits.
So I'm trying to think of. Well, you know what? Like I'm curious. Like because I want to give context for people who are not familiar with your work, but maybe before we get into all that, I mean, like, what does success look like for people in 2015 who want to make games? Like you sort of hinted at, like, you know, you're out, you're done. What did you realize you could not achieve?
Oh yeah, that's actually kind of relevant in the sense that we from the very beginning we embraced video games as a technology and a medium for creating art. The whole industry aspect and the community connected to it for us was something that we felt we needed to use because it was there, but that wasn't our goal. Our goal was the creation of art and distributing it to an audience, because we liked that, you know, digital distribution. We prefer that a lot more than you know, sort of hiding your work in a gallery or a museum. So we were always very resistant to working specifically for that game community or for that game industry. We just sort of, I guess we were pariahs in a way. We wanted to use it for our own purposes and wanted to use those distribution mechanisms and platforms for what we wanted to do. The funny thing is that happened after a while, even though, you know, there was a lot of sort of attention for our work outside of games, very few people outside of games actually played them. And that got more and more frustrating to us because that was our goal, really. We wanted to make games for people who don't play games, something we always said. And in a way, we wanted to emancipate this medium to be a real, you know, proper artistic medium that where artists produce that anybody can appreciate, like other media. And so with the last game that we made, Sunset, we sort of said, all right, if these non-gamers are not playing our games, what about these gamers? They seem to have a taste for certain artistic kinds of things. You know, that was after Dear Esther had been successful and gone home to some extent as well. And so we said, well, these are people, you know, we like them, we know them. I know that they're inspired by our work, etc. in part. So maybe there's an audience there for this type of work now too, if we, you know, meet them halfway and use like an FPS perspective and things like that. Certain, you know, embrace some of the conventions of this sort of subgenre. So Sunset became the first game that we made not for the whole mass audience of gamers, but for sort of a specific subsection that we thought could handle it. But yeah, I think we overestimated our own capacity to actually just do that, and partially probably because of the relative success of the Path, where we also did a similar things, that for practical reasons, because it was kind of a big project. We had to get a loan, so we sort of had to, okay, this thing better sell or something. So we sort of were very careful to sort of create something that was, you know, relatively accessible on some levels, and that worked. We were able to pay everything back, etc. So we said, yeah, we can do this if we want to, but it's not as simple as that. Or so things had changed too. I mean, that was the Path was released in the very beginning of sort of the independent development. So I think there was a lot of enthusiasm and curiosity that we took advantage of, whether, you know, we did that on purpose or not. But now I think a lot of people, you know, with all the sales and things like that, people have enormous libraries of unplayed games, etc. They've grown quite cynical, I think, and so they're always looking for reasons not to have to buy a game instead of curious and excited about something new.
So I can certainly relate with what you're saying about like trying to appeal to a different sort of audience. Here's my question: is just, if you're someone who's not already in the audience for games, like, how are you supposed to hear about, you know, stuff such as yours?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. We were so annoyed by that because, well, we work in real-time 3D. So not only do we make games, we also want people to have game hardware. because otherwise you can't really run our games, especially since, you know, we're artist programmers, so our games aren't exactly like super optimized. I mean, you know, yeah, that's not our forte really. So we had to always say, look, you need to get to these people who are not gamers. You need to get a computer that has a video card. A video card? And then we had to send them to like ATI or NVIDIA. So they go to these websites, and the first thing they see is like a dragon or something, or like a big heavy metal guy with a sword. And you know, these are serious people who are interested in art, and so kind of look, yeah.
I mean, because like that's the thing is
so,
like,
and Steam is another thing. You know, always these pop-up ads for like these infantile war games and all that. I mean, how can we? It's very difficult to tell people. No, really, we're kind of sincere artists. You will enjoy this if you play it, but
just ignore the dragon.
The context.
But I mean, like that's like the thing though. Is like, you know, people praise things like. I guess Journey would be an example. Like, no one is buying a PlayStation just to play Journey.
Yeah, probably not. So,
and I mean, and you were saying, like, you know, before we started, like, people are vying to get lucky in the game space. You said, like, it's inherent in games, but I think the way you phrased it, like, that's just sort of asking for trouble because you feel like the luck doesn't really take you anywhere.
Well, I was more talking about the structure of games as such, really. But that does extend to the commerce, I think, which is why it's such a sort of happy marriage in a way. And I mean, uncomfortably happy in the sense that, you know, in games, I think this is sort of, maybe it's a sign of the times as well, I don't know. But I find it very strange that you'll find these you know, the consumers defending large corporations that basically exploit them against anybody, usually very small individuals or small groups that dare to say something negative about these large corporations. And so that's very, very strange.
So, I mean, you mentioned, you know, you saw your work as like you wanted to emancipate games, like emancipate them from what? Like, what do they need to be emancipated from?
Well, from just being a vehicle for games. I mean, games have their place. Everybody does play games, not necessarily computer games, but, you know, games have a place in society, have always had a place in society. But I think that's different from the game technology that has been developed that can be used as a medium for you know, artistic presentations. You know, whether that's high art or just popular entertainment art, that doesn't really matter. And that's what I think, you know, because everybody plays games, so most people would say, well, why would I have to play a video game? I can just play Scrabble, you know, that's a game too. and I'm fine with that. It completely satisfied my desire to play games. I don't have to pretend to be a soldier running around shooting aliens to have that, you know, desire satisfied. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of like emancipated as a medium, I think. I think that's the contrast. And that's something that I've discussed with, for instance, Frank Lance a lot, who is sort of on the other side. Totally, we agree with each other that games are not a medium, that those are very different things, and that they'd best be separated, you know, but this technology can be used, you know, as a medium for expression. And I think the best way to do that is to remove the very formal game aspects, at least, out of it.
Yeah.
And because it's awkward, you know, a game, especially sort of a competitive game, it is about winning and losing. So it's about defeat and victory. It's about the opposition, fighting. It's an abstracted form of battle in a way. And you know, as long as it's abstracted, that's fantastic in a way, because, you know, a piece of a game of chess really helps you think about, you know, what conflict is, the nature of conflict even. But, and even strategies for, like, you know, winning. But if you, you know, develop a technology that can express all these things almost literally, like that can present that take it away from the abstraction and down to the sort of pure presentation again, then you get something really strange, because you get an abstract structure of conflict with a layer of realism on top of that. So you get all these characters that look real, that you could encounter in the street, that you can have an affinity with as a human, but they behave as pawns, really, and in a game. And that's really, really strange, and that's awful. And you know what happened? I mean, I'm always reminded of, it's kind of tried to do that, but I'm reminded of things like Holocaust, when that happens, when you start using these kinds of very abstract ways of thinking and you apply them to human bodies, it's atrocious. You really don't want to do that. It's a horrible thing. So, and I think what happens is, on the outside, people see that. Of course, when they look at a game, they don't see the abstract structure underneath, Grand Theft Auto or Call of Duty. They see guys killing other guys, because that's the surface layer. And the way they do that kind of killing, is unlike in any other medium. Have to be very familiar with the fact that there is a game structure underneath to understand that, despite of it looking realistic, it really is abstract. It's kind of a complex thing to do.
No, you probably heard me laughing a little. I was just laughing because I was like, well, that was the email thread that we first started talking about last year. It's something that, like, I don't know when it.
Yeah, it's a thing, I think this is the main reason why it's so difficult for people outside of games to understand that games are okay. Basically, it's because games are not okay, because this is not an okay thing to do.
It's becoming a lot harder to ignore as the visuals are able to more and more represent reality, and that was something like. I was curious to ask you about. It's just like, how do you think the visual style for most games are arrived at? Do you think there's just like this immediate assumption that, like, it has to look as realistic as possible, or do you get the sense from, like, you mentioned Steam, for example? What thinking do you think is going into, like, the way games should look?
That's hard to tell. You're asking me to how other people think. I don't know. What I do know is that there is, on the sort of more technical level, hardware and software, the motivation seems to be some form of photorealism. That's, and this motivation is kind of important because, well, basically the hardware that we're using really sucks. It is really very slow, despite of what everybody says. As soon as I have a small idea and I want to put that in a game, it already doesn't work. The first 5 minutes, it's already broken. I've already broken whatever new computer I have. It just never works what I want to do. So optimization is incredibly important. And so to optimize, you have to have a certain direction. What do you optimize for? Towards what goal? And the goal is almost always photographic realism, in a sort of, the way that an engineer even approaches it. Very analytical, very, they love, looking at physics and trying to find ways to mimic certain laws of physics and how light works and things like that. And they never can because the hardware sucks, but they have to find an approximation of that. And so that creates a certain limit, I think, in terms of what you can do artistically, as a game maker. So it's almost like, do you want to treat this medium seriously aesthetically, or do you want your game to run properly on people's machines?
What do you think? What do you think the game space is not learning from other mediums?
No, I don't really know. I'm sadly, I've been most familiar with games. I think the biggest difference that I can see is that the game industry really doesn't take itself serious as a medium. It considers itself to be a business first, I think it really sucks as being a business, by the way, because of its sort of very niche aspect. I mean, any real business would have expanded like a long time ago already. So that leads, of course, to the kind of reactions that you get from outside of games. If the industry itself doesn't take itself seriously as a medium, how do you want other people to do so? It's like, I mean, in other media, you see art film getting a lot of credit. You see literature getting a lot of credit. Classical music is considered valuable, etc. But in games, it's nothing like that. I mean, that's not to say that there's no artistic games, but they're not valued the way that they are in other media. In games, it's always the commercial hits that are, considered. It's like, it's as if you would say the Da Vinci Code is the best novel ever written. Yeah, exactly. That's a joke, right? But in games, that's exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned too that there's just too many obstacles standing in the way of games maturing, and I think maybe you said that you personally don't have a desire to take them down. What are the obstacles you're talking about?
Ooh, I don't know in what context I said that.
Well, I asked you the question like, what would you like to see sort of go away from games, and you said. Frankly, we don't have much hope for the media. There's just too many obstacles standing in the way of its maturity and too little desire to take them down.
Yeah. Well, hardware would be one obstacle. That's kind of a very difficult one to even. I mean, it's very difficult to be really creative within that. But it's always possible. And I also know that that it can be very good for creativity to have to struggle a bit. So that's not really a big problem. I think the biggest problem is more at the moment, acutely for us, a big reason to not want to even address the games audience is the behavior of gamers. As expressed in Gamergate, but I don't consider Gamergate to be some isolated fringe group. I consider them to be an extreme version of the entire game audience, and that includes the people they attack. Even they all sort of have the same taste. They all sort of have the same desires. They seem to only disagree on certain details and attack each other violently for them. But that's extremely uncomfortable, when you know that whenever you do something that is out of the ordinary, that deviates from whatever norms they have, it's going to be attacked or ignored instead of being, encouraged. I think that's a huge obstacle. I mean, there's literally fear involved with being creative in games. I mean, that's not healthy.
So I was going to ask, I always like to ask people who are outside of America, do these seem like American behaviors?
That's a little bit difficult for me to say because I've been married to an American for 16 years, or at least we've been together for 16 years. Yeah. So we've had a lot of, cultural conflicts between the two of us. Part of those are probably, America versus Europe and, the way that we've been brought up and brainwashed and all that. I don't know. The thing that I found sort of most enlightened that was said about that was by Liz Ryerson, who is American, who writes blogs and makes games and music. And she sort of analyzed it as being, yes, definitely sort of American, but even more so sort of rural American in a way. This is sort of an expression of people who have nothing else in their lives, who cling to these games as an important facet of their personality, and then nothing can touch that sort of. I mean, that is a pattern that you can definitely see. Whether that explains everything, I don't know, but. So, and whether that's strictly American, it probably isn't. I think it's it might be more acute in America, because it's a strange place. You know, distances are very. I mean, it's a bit medieval in a sense that the distances between the centers of populations are relatively large, despite of the fact that it's a very modern society and that there's huge cities and all that.
Yeah.
So I can understand that people growing up outside of a big city can feel isolated. That's probably not very good.
Yeah.